On one occasion, some repairs were wanted to a folding table. A man to whose house I had been undertook to do the work. It was performed to my entire satisfaction, and I inquired what the price would be. To my intense surprise,
this is the beginning of one of the many fascinating experiences narrated by the anthropologist Northcote W to illustrate his point about the character of the Igbo in the early 20th century. If you want to get a good glimpse of who the Igbo were before colonialism, and especially before the missionaries began influencing our traditions, this ignored report deserves your attention more than almost any other. The report, titled Anthropological Report on the Igbo-Speaking Peoples of Nigeria, was written by the first government anthropologist appointed by the British Colonial Administration, Northcote W, before he fell out with the administration. Many Igbo people have never heard of it, yet this report contains one of the richest collections of stories pertaining to actual behavior of the Igbo in pre-colonial times. While the colonial government assumed pre-colonial Igbo land had no organized legal systems and wanted a report that would show the Igbo society as singularly savage or primitive to justify imperial conquest, Thomas' report proved otherwise. His unconventional methods and accounts were often not what the administrators expected. For example, on the skill of the Oka blacksmith who repaired the leg of his collapsible table, Thomas reported that, and I quote, "It was a piece of work which would be creditable to a European blacksmith," end quote. The full story of this incident will be told later in this video. Northcote W also commented that the dress of the men is exceedingly practical. The young men wear simply a loincloth, and noted that he certainly saw few sick people when commenting on the health of the people. And just like G.T. Basden would observe a decade later, Thomas wrote that, generally speaking, people seem to be exceedingly hospitable, end quote. In my opinion, the most unique aspect of this report are the stories. Throughout the report, Thomas includes short anecdotes involving everyday conduct of the Igbo people. This is where the report becomes truly special. Most historical books tell us what people believed. Thomas often shows us how they actually behaved. He explains how a law was applied, how marriage negotiations occurred. He gives real examples of how people argued, negotiated, forgave, punished, and settled disputes. These anecdotes make the people feel real. You begin to understand how they thought, solved problems, and reasoned. In many ways, these stories provide one of the clearest windows into the minds of the Igbo before colonial rule changed many aspects of the society. In this video, we will listen to Northcote Thomas's account of Igbo dressing, hospitality, communal work, blacksmiths, and most fascinating of all, his stories illustrating Igbo people's character and their relationship with money, which is in complete opposite of the stereotype we hear today. But first, some background to the report. In 1909, Thomas became the first government anthropologist to be appointed by the British Colonial Office. Between 1909 and 1915, he carried out 4 major ethnographic surveys in southern Nigeria and Sierra Leone. One of the most important outputs from the surveys was the anthropological report on the Igbo-speaking peoples of Nigeria. The report was published in several parts. Part 1 focuses on the Oka neighborhood, covering Oka and many Igbo communities east of the Niger. Later volumes describe the western Igbo region. Together, These reports compare customs, beliefs, laws, economic life, and social organization across different Igbo communities. Rather than treating all Igbo people as exactly the same, Thomas carefully recorded the differences between towns and regions. This alone makes the report valuable. His work includes thousands of photographs, hundreds of collected artifacts, detailed notebooks, language records, and even sound recordings made on wax cylinders, now stored at the Museum of Archaeology and Anthropology, University of Cambridge. Today, these materials have become one of the greatest archives of early 20th century Igbo life. Some people hesitate to read colonial writings. That concern is understandable. Thomas wrote from the viewpoint of a British colonial official. Some of his opinions reflect colonial attitudes, and some photographs and descriptions may make modern readers uncomfortable. These limitations should not be ignored. However, rejecting the entire report because of its colonial background would also mean rejecting one of the richest collections of information about pre-colonial Igbo society. Modern scholars have increasingly returned to Thomas's work because they recognize its historical value. His notebooks preserve names, places, customs, and local explanations that cannot easily be found elsewhere. Now let's listen to an excerpt from part 1 of the anthropological report on the Igbo-speaking peoples of Nigeria. If you like this type of video, please help feed the algorithm by hitting the like button.
Awka is a town of blacksmiths, though some of the quarters have taken to farming and none are wholly dependent on others for food supplies. Half of the younger men go out at a time, remaining absent for 4 or more months, according to the custom of their sept. Their wanderings may take them as far as and beyond Ida in the Igara country, over 100 miles away, and in the old days it was their custom to bring back their earnings in the form of goods, which they forced their neighbours to buy, probably at exorbitant prices. As to the aristocrats of the district, they never condescended to carry their own loads. Such, at any rate, is their own account. Their neighbours, however, tell a rather different story, in which they themselves figure as the spoilers and the blacksmiths as the sufferers. For they assert that they set upon the homecoming wielders of the hammer and despoiled them of all their goods. However this may be, it is certain that Awka was, and still is, far richer than the majority of its neighbours, as is evident from the fact that the men who possessed 2 or more wives are 3 times as numerous as those who possess only 1. I made a good many attempts to see the Awka blacksmiths at work, but it appears that the greater part of their labour is done on their travels, and those who had their tools at home, whether from jealousy of trade secrets or mere indolence, never carried out their promises to let me see them at work. A boy begins to learn at 8 or 9, mainly by travelling with workers. There are 2 kinds of training, one for iron and one for brass. The test for a blacksmith is to make small knives and holes, and if they pass muster, the man can become a journeyman, probably at the age of 27 or so. He goes on with this work until he has a son old enough to take his place. A brass worker makes small brass plates and then bigger ones, and on passing this test can travel. Before a journeyman goes out, he prepares food, and the head of the family is invited to say, "So-and-so is going on his journey. May all be prosperous. Ancestors and good spirits be with him behind and before." Then the sacrifice is performed, which is customary, and is described under the head of sacrifice. A doctor decides where the man is to go, and in some families he only stays out 5 months and returns in the 6th to make his Okwo feast. A fine is payable to the family if he overstays his time. According to another account, a learner first works the bellows, then he makes needles, which were formerly used as currency, then finger rings, razors, chains. Although I saw no man at work, I had some opportunity of judging of the skill of the blacksmiths. The strut of one of the legs of a collapsible table had on it a brass shoe fitting with a sort of claw over the strut and further secured by 3 screws. It was made fast to the crosspiece of the leg by a slot passing over a staple. There was a bend in the middle, and this was where it broke. I took the 2 pieces to a blacksmith, described to him what had to be done, sketched the angle at which the shoe should be, and asked him to bring the result for me to see. A few days later, he brought the shoe up, with claw, screw holes, and slot. It fitted perfectly, and no adjustment whatever was needed. It was a piece of work which would be creditable to a European blacksmith. Over this area, the language is fairly homogeneous, though there are dialectical differences between town and town, so that, for example, a native of Agolo is sometimes unintelligible to a native of Orca, 6 miles away. Besides variation in words, variation in pronunciation is also found. Nemo seems to have some peculiarities of its own. There is, for example, a peculiar aspirated R, which my Orca interpreter took to be an S. At Orbu, too, there are peculiarities of pronunciation. H seems to take the place of S or R, but my Orca interpreter found no difficulty in making himself understood. Amansi and Ebenebe form a group by themselves, so far as I could find out. This is somewhat remarkable, for they are separated by the river Mamu, and whereas Ebenebe is 7 or 8 miles from Amansi, Ugwoba is only about 1 mile. Yet Ugwoba belongs to the Abwaja group, often unintelligible to the Orca interpreter, though in the rainy season it is practically entirely cut off from any Abwaja town. Communication between Ebenebe and the Abwaja country, on the other hand, is very easy, and the Abwaja people visit the Ebenebe market every week. Probably this multiplicity of dialects extends over all the Igbo country. Orca and Onitsha are sufficiently distinct to rank as separate languages. On the west of the Niger, I was informed, 5 different languages are distinguished. The Orata language, spoken at Bendi, is again quite distinct. I have no data for estimating the number of languages in the remainder of the Igbo area. The dress of the men is exceedingly practical. The young men wear simply a loincloth, and when they wish to dance, this is elaborated by cowrie armlets, ivory anklets, and other merely decorative adjuncts. They remove their loincloth without the slightest hesitation at a washing place, whether women are present or not. Women about the age of 17 or 18, that is to say, after they have definitely gone to their husbands, invariably wear a cloth, but remove it with an equal lack of embarrassment at a washing place. Boys put on their loincloths sometimes as young as 10, sometimes as old as 14. After 14, they will only remove it under the circumstances already mentioned. Girls, on the other hand, up to the age of 17, are as often seen without their cloths as with them. On the whole, the country cannot be called productive. It is so-called white land, especially round Orca, and the yams produced are poor. I found it impossible to obtain statistics of the kind obtained in the Edo country as to the number of yams produced per annum. They are not tied up in the same way, and are dug up at different seasons of the year. Estimates were given to me by various men, but they do not seem to me sufficiently reliable to be worth reproducing. One result of the unproductive character of the country is that in the rainy season, many people are compelled to subsist, at least in parts, upon roots, a diet resulting in some disorder of the digestive organs, which frequently carries off several hundred people in a town. Apart from this, the native doctors assured me that the country is healthy, and that, in the parts towards the seacoast, nearly 10 times as many people out of health are to be found as in the neighbourhood of Orca. I certainly saw exceedingly few sick people. If a man has a friend in another town and finds him out when he goes to his house, he will take yams from the store and eat. He will notify a neighbour of what he has done. Generally speaking, people seem to be exceedingly hospitable. In wandering about villages, it happens to me several times in one day that a family which is making its meal is anxious for me to join them in eating roast yams. When I meet a man carrying palm wine, he will often urge me to take a drink. In the matter of offering of sacrificial meats, however, they were more backward than the Edo-speaking peoples, possibly because of the more widespread influence of Christianity among them. If I entered a house to take a photograph in the more remote parts, the owner would insist on my eating cola or drinking palm wine, or at least accepting a small present of yams. And frequently, though it is rather reversing the proper order of things, people who came to see me would bring me palm wine with which to entertain me. It was, however, clearly intended to be drunk on the spot. Customs in connection with cola eating are rare, but at Orca they say, "Chuku, will you give us life, children, money?" And those present say, "Ise," that is, "be it so." With the seat of authority so indefinite as it was in most cases, it is natural that the organization of work was less elaborate than among the Edo. At Nofia, the young men would go out to clean the road when the chief told them, and the old men would look after them to see that they did their work. Precisely how long this took, they did not say. But at Ugwoba, one day in the whole year was devoted to road work, and it is not surprising that they now say that they have less time for yam farming. In some of the towns, a chief could call his people out to work for him 4 days in the month. They could either go on days he fixed or tell him what day they chose. Their task would be the ordinary farm work. The bigger young men cleaned grass or cut sticks. The younger men would make heaps and so on, and the old men supervised. The organization of the country was extremely simple, if indeed it can be called organization. Each sept had its head, and there was sometimes a recognized head of a quarter or even of a town, but this was exceptional. In general character, the people seemed to be exceedingly pleasant, and in particular far less greedy for money than the peoples on the west of the Niger. It happened to me on one occasion, for example, that some repairs were wanted to a folding table. A man to whose house I had been and with whom I had eaten cola undertook to do the work. It was performed to my entire satisfaction, and I inquired what the price would be. To my intense surprise, the reply was, "You are my friend. You have eaten cola with me. I can't take money from you." This was by no means an isolated episode. When the doctors of Ifite Nebo came to me, I was anxious to secure a specimen of snake medicine from them. We were by that time on very good terms, and when I told them what I wanted and asked what the price would be, they consulted together for a few minutes and said to me, "We will ask nothing. You are our friend. You are a traveller, and we are travellers. You talk to us about our business as if you knew about it. You are a doctor. We will not take money from you." It might be imagined that this was an attempt to get a larger amount from me by way of a dash than they could venture to ask as the price of the medicine, or that the medicine was not genuine. I do not think either of these suppositions is correct, for the refusal of money was so obviously sincere that no question of payment arose afterwards when the medicine was brought. Another incident will sufficiently prove their sincerity. I inquired as to their procedure when they were called to a sick man. They told me that they marched up and down, beating their doctor's staff on the ground, and then declared that they saw an evil spirit. I asked what they really saw. They laughed and said, "Oh, nothing, but it's a good way of getting money out of a man." With such frankness as this in matters affecting their trade, I can hardly imagine that they would deceive me in the matter of the snake medicine. The setting up of a market is apparently a very simple matter. A quarter or town decides to have one. The space is cleared, and when the aloe tells the doctor to set him up, the doctor plants oboe and names the name of the aloe. The market can be known both by its day name and its aloe name. The only peculiarity that I found in the way of markets was at Achala, where they have two marketplaces, the markets of which are on the same day. Each belongs to 4 of the quarters. Women frequently pass from one to another on the same day. The marketplaces are sometimes quite bare. Sometimes, as at Nebo and Nice, there are houses belonging to the different quarters. At Nebo, I was told that the women sat there. At Nice, however, I found they were mainly occupied by men drinking palm wine.